Hi. Okay, here we go. Facebook Live, just for a bit of reality and uh, technical challenges. My computer did not want to load Facebook Live right now, so I'm very happy to be on. Let me just double check the audio that we're good. Okay, great. So today's Facebook Live, we're going to focus on myths again. So we talked about myths already. This is our third time. So one is just myths overall, right? That they persist around menopause because we don't have enough data to understand what is really happening and how we make that useful to individual women to make choices. So we have all these myths that we've got to dig around. So that's one. When I looked at over, I think it was 27 articles, there were over 160 different myths that were described. And it broke them down into a few logical chunks, right? About 25% of them were around when is it going to start? And we talked about that in our prior Facebook Live session. The second chunk was what's it going to be like, i.e., what are the symptoms? And then the third chunk was like, what do you do about it? So here we are in the second chunk, which is about the symptoms. So first we're going to talk about the myths that exist around symptoms, which are interesting. The way that we broke down the myths around menopause overall, they kind of fall into categories. And it's understandable because, again, as women, we just want to know what's going on, right? Prepare ourselves so we can make good decisions for ourselves. So that's where we'll start. So looking at all of the myths around symptoms from my research, there were, I think it's, sorry, I have to look at my notes. There were 35 symptom myths overall. They were broken down between about half of them were myths around hot flash. And again, it's kind of reasonable because hot flash is really the hallmark symptom for menopause. It's very well known, has like the strongest branding, let's call it, around menopause. So then we're going to walk through some of the categories around the myths for hot flash. The other big chunk is really around the symptoms themselves, right? How long will they last? Uh, how bad will they be? So again, if you step back and you think, what are we really trying to address? We're trying to address, like, again, our expectations. Do we know what symptoms are going to come? Like, what's the symptom set I can expect? How soon? How long will they last? Will they last forever? Those kind of questions are really what underpins the myths. And then there are other things around, like, basic things, like, are they all just physical? Are they all just mood? Again, wanting to categorize so we can be prepared. So let's look into the myths around hot flash. So hot flash, again, so interesting because like everyone uses the example of menopause and the difficulty it is because we unpredictably sweat. Anyway, so looking at hot flash, so because, okay, let's break it down. So we've got 16 are hot flash. About a quarter of them are about like hot flash indicates the start of menopause. Another quarter of them say that hot flash is the only symptom of menopause. And then the third group is hot flash and night sweats always come together. And the last one is hot flashes affect everyone. So those had equal play in the research. So again, all of these kind of weave together. When do they start? Is it the only one I'm going to have? Are hot flashes different than night sweats? Do they happen as a set? And does it happen to everyone? And in thinking about this, you know, let me just step back and say this. It really bothers me that when we talk about menopause experience, the phrase is, this phrase is used so often, which is, it's different for every woman, so we can't really say. And in one side, it's true. On the other side is, it's so frustrating because it's the 21st century and can't we have some answers to these basic questions by now? And that's why this kind of work and conversation is so important because we have to figure this out for ourselves sooner than later. Anyway, so going back to hot flash and understanding the myths around hot flash. So one is hot flash is related to fluctuations in estrogen, meaning when estrogen drops, it can trigger hot flash. There's not conclusive research around how the mechanism of hot flash and what triggers it. And I've gone through a bunch of them. For me, the most compelling is that when there are drops in estrogen, that's when it triggers. And drops in estrogen actually happen coincidentally at night, and that's why night sweats can happen. So thinking about, does menopause start with hot flash? My spin on that is menopause transition is typically marked by the onset of symptoms that we individual women recognize some shit's happening and we pay attention, and then we know we're like in the throes of the hormonal change. So that's one. So the myth is, the answer to the myth is yes, it could be, but then no, it may not be. So you could have other symptoms, but the hot flash may be the most prevalent that you're paying attention to in that moment. The other is, so hot flash and night sweats, do they always come together? And the answer to that is no, they don't. Some women have just night sweats, some women have just hot flashes. So it is, again, based on the individual woman, but you won't necessarily have one or the other. And having one and not both doesn't necessarily indicate severity of hormonal change. So that's one, or that's two. And then doesn't have to everyone. Again, not necessarily, not at all, in fact. Hot flashes are, again, based on hormonal fluctuation, hormonal profile, and overall physical state, so that it doesn't happen to everyone. And in fact, I'm sure you've heard that some women just kind of go through their 40s and 50s and get to a point where they're not having periods anymore all of a sudden. And then they're like, oh, right, okay, so I'm not having periods anymore. No symptoms whatsoever. So there's a full spectrum of experiences, and not everyone will have hot flash. I'll share my own little story around hot flash, which is, I never thought I'd have a hot flash because, like so many women I know, like always freezing cold. And I started to kick off the covers at night consistently, and I still do. I'm not really sweating very much, but I'm always just more warm than normal at night. And it was one of these things that it hit me like, oh my God, this is hormonal changes. So it can sneak up on you in small changes and also big ones. So for me right now, it's a small change. So those are the questions around hot flash. Is it the only one? Is it the symptom that kicks off menopause? Do they come with night sweats? Does it affect everyone? That's a little kind of understanding there, which is hot flash is very easy to determine. It does not happen to everyone the same, and it is not necessarily the kickoff of the menopause transition. And so we talked about before that oftentimes women see the perimenopause symptoms like heavy bleeding and so forth as the first signs of the transition. Then symptoms. So the myths around symptoms are basically, there's two that I love about the information on the internet. It's completely contradictory. So there's myths that say symptoms only last for years. And there are myths that are like symptoms last forever. And it just makes me laugh. However, what it's pointing to is a woman wants to know how long the symptoms are going to last. It's a very reasonable question. And this is why it makes me so angry, actually, because we don't have any data. We have no ability to determine for a single woman what is going to happen for her. I mean, I don't want to rant, but it just makes me angry. And we need to fix this, right? We have so many aspects of our lives where we make very informed decisions, and we can't do this for a very important part of our lives. So symptoms. Yet how long will it last? We don't know. It depends woman to woman. The average age, the average length, I've read so many different places, but it really comes down to around like 5 to 7 years of transition, a few in perimenopause, and then a few after. So once periods stop and your body's moving to a new normal, then those are the years where women are symptomatic. And the other persistent question is, are they just physical? So is it just hot flashes? Is it just, some of the symptoms noted were heart palpitations and dry mouth. Um, so it's not just physical, it's also emotional. And I think that many women have experienced that, even who are on the call, where they realize like the anxiety or the depressive moods, irritability, i.e. rage, have heightened during this time of transition. All completely normal. So that's where we are with myths. I just wanted to tee that up in the construct of where we started the conversation, that we want to know, right? When's it going to start? We want to know what it's going to be like. And then the next session will be how to look at the underlying reasons for the symptoms and how to deal with them. But going back to symptoms. So then what I did next was I looked at 25 different articles on the web. I just Googled top menopause symptoms. And I listed out every symptom that they listed, and I categorized them because, I can't help myself. Okay, so as you'd expect, the number one symptom is hot flash. So I'll go and order the top 5. Hot flash and night sweats, vaginal issues, sleep and fatigue, urinary issues, and cognitive issues. So those were the ones that were the most talked about and listed. And I want to just caveat this by saying that most of the websites I looked at were medical related. So U of M Medical Center, Vanderbilt Medical Center, like those types of places. So they're very medical orientation. And they also are basing their lists on clinical experience. So women that are going in with these problems to be addressed. 2 thoughts on that. So obviously it's a very valuable and valid data set. There's also women who are treating things at home or not seeking treatment that are outside of their purview. So keeping that in mind, hot flash, right? We understand that hot flash is prevalent and top of mind when you think about menopause symptoms. Vaginal issues. So vaginal issues are high priority because we all love our vaginas, and because our vagina tissue is, the quality of tissue is tied to estrogen. So estrogen starts to fluctuate and go away, the quality of tissues starts to deteriorate. I hate to use that word in the same sense as vagina, but it's kind of the reality. And so this is an issue: dryness, itchiness, uncomfortable sex, all of that, not fun. A very important issue. The other is sleep and fatigue. And this, as we know, is hormonal fluctuations, our ability to sleep. Estrogen, progesterone, and melatonin have a relationship. So that it's just research I was reading was so cool, but it basically said, like, with low progesterone and then you have low melatonin, it's really hard to sleep. And so in perimenopause, progesterone drops. So that makes sense, right? If progesterone drops and melatonin drops, it's gonna be really hard to go to sleep. So that's a top issue. Urinary, fun times. Incontinence, yay! Luckily, there's some improved products around incontinence and like little leakage here and there in the market today, which is great. But it is an issue again. So urogenital health related to lower levels of estrogen. So it's affecting frequency of having to pee, frequency of UTI, also not fun, and incontinence. Yay, it all sounds so exciting. Um, the next one is cognitive. And that's also makes sense because we have to, rather, we're worried about, right, what happens to us cognitively as we age. And it's very difficult to extract issues from menopause versus overall aging. However, there is a very strong understanding that estrogen affects cognitive function, whether it's through the brain tissues and the synapses and the coverings of the neurons, or it's through the ability for the brain to actually function. I cannot say, but there is a big connection through it. And that's why you think about estrogen and postpartum depression, um, estrogen and Alzheimer's, like they're big links. So those are the top 5. The next really quickly are menstruation symptoms, sex issues, essentially loss of libido, be able to have intercourse is more related to vaginal issues, And then mood. Mood is a big one. Body issues with headaches or weight gain. Weight's different. Body aches. That's overall stuff. There are a lot of changes, and those are less prevalent. Um, and then hair, skin, and nails. Hair loss, um, la- more relaxed skin, less collagen, and then brittle nails. So when you look at this, it looks really daunting, but that's how it lays out. And again, so this is the perspective from mostly clinicians who are seeing women present in their offices, in their consultations for treatment. Hot flash, vaginal issues, sleep and fatigue, urinary issues, cognitive issues. So that's what I wanted to share today on symptoms. I know it seems a little bit half-assed because as soon as you talk about symptoms, you want to know what to do about them. And we'll get into some of those dynamics of what causes symptoms and some things to do about symptoms in the next session. Um, April said, oh yeah, hot flashes and heart palpitations. Uh, yeah, kind of intermittent, they come and go. Dry mouth, yes, Chris, just going through the comments now. Dry mouth, it's a thing, but it's a very low, like low frequency thing. So when I did the research on all the symptoms, very few places did it come up, but it did come up. So I just wanted to mention it. Um, yeah, and Juju, is that how I say that? Marie said heart perhaps since late 30s. Yeah, I think that it's tied with cycle, as April pointed out. And yeah, it's super frustrating because we don't have enough education for gynaes in the clinic to really deal with this stuff. And that's why like women like us suffer for years and years and years, and just it's such bullshit, to be honest. Um, okay, one thing I wanted to share was a specific myth that is really important to me. I wrote a whole Medium article about it, is osteoporosis and bone health. So when we age, particularly for women, it's more impactful. The body changes and menopause changes to the bones. But the bones, we lose bone quantity and we lose the quality goes down. And what frustrates me the most is you don't, in most insurance plans, you're not asked or you're not asked to get a bone density test until you hit 60, and then insurance will cover it. But the issue is, right, in my view, based on research I've seen, at 60 it's kind of a little bit too late, right? The biggest change in bone density happens in a woman's 40s, right? So that's 20 years of degradation of bone density, and then they're not going to test it. Like, give me a break. So this is the thing I want to share for sure, right? That bone issues are not just for when you're 60, 70, or 80. That your bones, we need to very much start paying attention to our bones in your 40s. And the quick thing to that is to just exercise more, right? Um, Calcium, but not necessarily in the form of milk. Milk's not that, it's kind of a bamboozle, milk and calcium. It's a whole thing about that. But mostly muscle tone, resistance exercise, moving your body, keeping your bones healthy, meaning your bones are being agitated and stressed regularly. So that's the final specific myth, myth buster for today. Again, next week, going to talk about um, some of the underlying reasons for symptoms and what you can do about it. Great. Hope you're all well in the time of Corona, and we'll see you next week.